All right, sweetheart, since you're so quiet back there, why don't you come up here and show us how you'd handle a real threat? Or are you just here to watch? The question, dripping with condescension, echoed off the polished wood floors of the dojo. The crowd of students, a mix of eager young men and a few women, snickered nervously. They looked from the source of the voice. Sensei Rick, a man whose black belt was matched only by the size of his ego, to the woman standing silently in the back. She was of average height and build, her hair pulled back in a simple, functional ponytail. She wore plain gray sweats, a stark contrast to the crisp white GIs of the other students. She hadn't moved, hadn't flinched. Her gaze remained neutral, her posture relaxed, but perfectly balanced. There was nothing about her that screamed danger. There was nothing that screamed anything at all. She was a study, an unassuming presence, a ghost in the corner of the room. But when the retired general, sitting on the visitor's bench, saw her stance, a subtle shift in weight almost imperceptible to the untrained eye, he leaned forward. He had seen that stance before, not in a dojo, but in the dust, choked briefing rooms of forward, operating bases where legends were discussed in hushed, reverent tones. It was a stance of absolute readiness, a coil of potential energy hidden beneath, a veneer of calm. If you believe that, true strength doesn't need to announce itself. Type competence in the comments below. Sensei Rick, basking in the attention of his students, mistook her silence for fear. He beckoned with an exaggerated, impatient gesture. Come on, don't be shy. We're all friends here. It's just a simple risk or defense. I'll even go easy on you. More chuckles rippled through the room. The woman, whose name no one had bothered to ask, simply gave a short, almost imperceptible nod. She moved forward with an economy of motion that was jarring in its efficiency. There were no wasted steps, no hesitation. Her feet barely seemed to touch the floor as she covered the distance to the center of the mat. Onlookers saw a woman walking. The general saw a predator closing the distance, every line of her body aligned for maximum potential. She stopped a few feet from the sensei, her expression unchanged. It was this utter lack of reaction that seemed to infuriate Rick the most. He was a man who fed on emotion, fear from his students, admiration from his peers. This woman offered him nothing. She was a blank slate, a void, and it unnerved him. To cover his discomfort, he amplified his arrogance. Seeing nothing to it, he said, turning to his class with a smug grin, the first step is overcoming your fear. Now, I'm going to grab her wrist. I want you all to watch how she panics, how her assumptions about her own strength fail her. This is the moment of truth for a beginner. He was creating a narrative of failure before the demonstration had even begun, setting her up as a prop for his lesson. He reached out, his hand a blur of practice, confidence, and clamped down on her right wrist. He expected a flinch, a gasp, a desperate pull. He received none of it. For a fraction of a second, her hand remained completely limp in his grasp, a dead weight. It was a disorienting sensation. Then the world tilted on its axis. It wasn't a move he recognized from any martial art he had ever studied. It was a symphony of brutal biomechanics. She didn't pull against his strength. She borrowed it. Her fingers, with no apparent effort, curled around the base of his thumb, applying pressure to a nerve cluster he didn't know existed. A jolt of white hot pain shot up his arm, forcing his grip to slacken involuntarily. In the same fluid motion, her body flowed into his space. Her left hand slid under his extended arm, cupping his elbow while her hips turned, using his own forward momentum to shatter his balance. He felt a moment of weightlessness, a sudden, terrifying realization that the floor was no longer where it was supposed to be. Before he could even process the thought, he was on his back, the air driven from his lungs by the impact. The woman was kneeling on his chest, her forearm pressed firmly against his throat. It wasn't a choke. It was a simple, undeniable statement of control. Her eyes, for the first time, met his. They were calm, clear, and utterly devoid of malice or triumph. It was the detached focus of a professional who had just completed a task. The entire sequence, from his grab to his submission, had taken less than 2 seconds. The dojo was plunged into a deafening silence. The nervous laughter was gone, replaced by a collective, held breath. Students stared their mouths agape, trying to reconcile the image of the loud, powerful sensei on the floor with the quiet, unassuming woman who had put him there. Rick himself lay pinned, not by weight, but by a perfect application of leverage and technique. He couldn't move, not because she was strong, but because she understood the mechanics of the human body better than he did. She knew precisely where to place pressure to shut down his ability to resist. He tried to push her off, but it was like trying to push over a mountain. Her center of gravity was an immovable anchor. That's not possible. One of the senior students whispered. The word sounded like a cannon shot in the stillness. Rick stared up at the woman, his face a mask of shock and humiliation. The pain in his thumb was a dull throb, but the blow to his ego was a mortal wound. He had been dismantled, not defeated in a fight, but systematically taken apart like a machine with a precision that was both terrifying and beautiful. The woman simply held her position, waiting. She wasn't gloating. She wasn't even breathing heavily. She was waiting for the lesson to be understood, for the reality of the situation to sink into the minds of everyone present. It was her silence now that held all the power. In the room, from the visitor's bench, the general rose to his feet. The sound of his dress shoes on the hardwood floor was the only noise. He walked calmly to the edge of the mat, his face etched with a look of profound respect. He didn't address the stunned class or the humiliated instructor. He spoke directly to the woman. "Ma'am," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the unmistakable weight of command. "Permission to see your identification." It was a request, not an order, phrased with a difference that confused everyone in the room. The woman looked from the sensei on the floor to the general. She gave another short nod, released the pressure on Rick's throat, and rose to her feet in a single smooth motion. She reached into the small gym bag she'd left by the wall and retrieved a simple, unadorned wallet. From it, she produced a card and handed it to the general. He took it without looking at her, his eyes scanning the text. The students watched, bewildered. "Sensei." Rick pushed himself up slowly, clutching his wrist, his face flushed with a mixture of anger and disbelief. He started to speak, to protest, to demand an explanation, but the look on the general's face froze the words in his throat. The general's expression had shifted from respect to outright awe. He looked up from the card, not at the woman, but at the assembled class. "For those of you who are wondering what just happened," the general began, his voice resonating with authority, "you have just witnessed the difference between a sport and a science, the difference between loud assumptions and quiet competence." He held up the identification card. "This is a Department of Defense active credentials card. The name on it is Anna Morgan." He paused, letting the name hang in the air. But I doubt many people know her by that name. He looked back down at the card, then fixed his gaze on Rick. What you know is what you see. A woman of slight build. What you don't know is what's written here. He began to read in a clear, measured cadence that stripped away all ambiguity. Unit designation, Joint Special Operations Command. Task 47, Primary Specialty, Special Activities Division, cross-trained with Naval Special Warfare Development Group, and 1st SFOD Combat Deployments. 17, Classified. He lowered the card and looked around the room, his eyes hard as steel. You see a quiet student. I see an operator who has spent more time in hostile territory than all of you combined have spent in this dojo. You made a judgment based on her gender. The enemies of our nation made the same judgment. They are not here to tell you how that worked out for them. He turned his full attention back to Rick. You asked her to show you how to handle a threat. She did. The fact that you were still breathing when she was done was a professional courtesy. The validation was absolute, a public correction, delivered with the force of a hammer, blow, shattering every ignorant assumption that had filled the room only moments before. The story of what happened in the dojo that afternoon spread through the nearby military base. Like wildfire, it started in the mess halls, whisper between soldiers over dinner. It jumped to the barracks, then to the online forums and text message groups that connected the entire community. The details became mythic. With each retelling, the toucan, takedown, the general speech, the look on Sensei Rick's face, the quiet woman named Anna Morgan became a local legend. Overnight, a living embodiment of the quiet professional ethos that special operators held so sacred. She was the ghost who walked among them, the hidden blade. The dojo itself underwent a profound transformation. The next day, Sensei Rick entered the training hall, not as an instructor, but as a student. He addressed the class, his voice stripped of all its former arrogance, and delivered a sincere, humbling apology. He admitted his prejudice, his ignorance, and his disrespect. He then announced that the dojo's core philosophy would be changing. It would no longer be about winning belts or tournaments, but about cultivating humility, awareness, and true competence. He took down the flashy trophies from the walls and replaced them with a single-framed photo. A grainy security camera still of Anna kneeling calmly on his chest. Beneath it, a new plaque was installed. It read, "The Morgan Principal, the loudest one in the room, is the weakest one in the room." Anna, for her part, handled the newfound attention with the same quiet grace she handled everything else. She accepted Rick's apology with a simple nod and returned to the dojo, not as a guest, but as a student. She participated in the drills, listened to the instruction, and offered quiet, precise corrections to her fellow students when asked. She never spoke of her past, never boasted about her skills. Her actions were her only resume. When younger students, emboldened by the legend, would ask her about her time in the service, she would simply reply, "I was part of a team. We did a job." She deflected all praise, turning the focus back to the principles of the discipline. She taught them that true strength wasn't about overpowering an opponent, but about controlling oneself. It was about the calm in the center of the storm, the precision born from thousands of hours of silent, dedicated practice. She became a mentor without ever trying to be one. Her presence alone was a constant lesson in humility. The respect she now commanded was absolute, and it was a respect she had never asked for, but had earned in 2 seconds of undeniable, irrefutable proof. Her legacy was not one of fear, but of inspiration. She had proven in the most dramatic way possible that what you are is infinitely more important than what you say you are. Months turn into years. The dojo on the edge of the base became known for producing a different kind of martial artists. They were quiet, respectful, and technically precise. The story of Anna Morgan was now part of the institution's oral history, told to every new student on their first day. It was a parable about the dangers of assumption and the virtue of humility. General Wallace would occasionally visit, sitting on the same bench, and watch as the legacy of that single afternoon continued to ripple forward. He saw the change in Rick, who was now a far better teacher for having been so thoroughly humbled. He saw the focus in the eyes of the students who trained not for ego, but for mastery. Anna was no longer there. She had moved on to her next assignment, her next quiet posting, disappearing back into the shadows from which she had briefly emerged. But her presence was still felt. It was in the silence between commands, in the sharp, efficient movements of the students, in the culture of mutual respect that permeated the training hall. The lesson had been learned and integrated into the very DNA of the place. The true measure of a person's worth is not found in the volume of their voice, but in the precision of their actions. It is not declared in boasts, but demonstrated in moments of pressure. Legacy is not a monument you build to yourself. It is the foundation you lay for others to build upon. It is the quiet competence that inspires, the silent strength that endures, and the profound respect that is earned when words fall away and only truth remains. The world is full of noise, of people clamoring for attention, desperate to be seen as strong, as important, as worthy. But true strength, the kind that changes the world, the kind that shapes lives, doesn't need to shout. It operates in the silence. It works. It proves. It endures long after the echoes of arrogance have faded away. It is the steady hand, the calm eye, and the unwavering spirit of the quiet professional. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud ignorance, and where character defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.